Hello, I'm Carl Seibert. Thanks for joining me. In this video, we're going to take a look at working with Exif Data in Photomechanic Plus. Exif Data, the stuff that the camera writes, it's basically a log file. Yeah, that. Truth of the matter is, most of us actually use Exif Data pretty much all the time when we're processing pictures or when we're editing. Here in Photomechanic, I have my info text field open in the upper right corner of the preview. And this is stuff that I kind of keep an eye on: ISO, aperture, shutter speed, that sort of thing. Here we are in On1 RAW. Same kind of deal. It's open in the upper right corner. I kind of keep an eye on it. I'll be honest, I use it, and I don't think about it very much. If you're a regular viewer of this channel or a reader of my blog, you probably get the impression that I'm pretty dismissive of Exif Data. And in fact, I kind of am. But I'll give you the backstory to this video. On1 just introduced a noise reduction product, something that they called No Noise. Executive summary, it's actually really pretty cool. It's probably worth checking out. I was all excited. It was the first noise product that I've ever used that did more good than harm. So I wanted to find noisy pictures, or at least high ISO pictures, in my library that I might try the thing on. Well, this is interesting because that's Exif Data. Exif Data is information written by the camera, and it includes all of that kind of stuff. Here we are looking at the cover page of the actual Exif standards. 154 pages long. If you find the IPTC standard too stimulating to read late at night, you could try this. It'll calm you right down. Exif Data is a big, sprawling topic. It's not very well standardized, and it's not exactly a cultural treasure. 100 years from now, I don't think anybody's going to care what preferences you chose for your camera when you shot the picture. All that said, I had simpler aspirations. I just wanted to find some high ISO pictures in my library. So how to proceed? Well, first, let's take a quick look at some Exif Data. I mean, we saw it in the corner of Photomechanic, and we saw it up in the corner of On1. You can see it in the right rail in Lightroom. Photoshop, it's kind of more of a problem. It's kind of buried, but it doesn't really matter because when I use Photoshop, I have Photomechanic open somewhere on another monitor anyway. But what does the stuff really look like? Well, here we are. We're looking here at a Nikon NEF file, and we see zillions of fields, literally hundreds of these fields that are specific to the Nikon camera. And as you can see, it's logged everything. We can tell what focus mode that I was in. We can tell that I had back button focus set up. We can basically see every preference that was set, every setting that was applied. There is just tons of this information. Obviously, we cannot see all of this in Photomechanic or really in any other program. A lot of this stuff is particular to a particular camera, particular to behaviors of certain cameras. What tags are used and what they mean might be particular to a certain camera. The big three cameras, Nikon, Sony, Canon, log very verbosely. They log just about everything. Fujifilm cameras log less stuff and different stuff. Leica cameras log even less stuff. Some of these fields are indeed sort of universal Exif fields that apply to a lot of different cameras, and those are indeed the ones that we'll see in Photomechanic or Lightroom or On1 or whatever program. But we need to keep an open mind here. Be prepared for a little ambiguity because there's just a lot of detail and inconsistency and nuance. So we have all of this logging data that the camera writes in here. And we also kind of have everything but the kitchen sink. Basically anything the camera or the camera company wants to record, this is where it goes. So in addition to some textual data, we have a thumbnail image or a preview image. In fact, we might have several of them stashed in here. GPS data is also here in the Exif. Now, GPS is a topic for another day because Photomechanic does a whole lot of stuff with GPS, and that's worth its own separate video. Let's take a quick look at this preview business. So here I've executed a second exiftool command, and I've piped it to grep, and I've pulled out all the lines that include the word binary. Because in exiftool, when it comes on a block of binary data in the metadata, it writes out this informational line and tells you how it is that you can extract that binary data. Most of the binary stuff in the metadata is indeed preview images. So let's look at what we've got here. We have this one. It's 57 kilobytes. We have another one here. This is 2.5 megabytes. We have yet another one, 875 kilobytes, almost a megabyte. A couple of things that aren't preview images, and yet another preview image that weighs in at 173 kilobytes. So that's 4.5 or more megabytes of preview image data in our metadata here in the Exif. So you've probably heard me talk about when you're ready to put images up on the web, go ahead and just remorselessly delete the Exif data because you've already processed your picture. At this point, you don't really care what the camera had to say about things, and you don't want to weight down your page load time, if you're talking about websites, with all these preview images. I mean, here we have almost 5 megabytes of preview images, and on the web, you never have a picture that's 5 megabytes, let alone 5 megabytes worth of metadata. So that's kind of what that's all about. Now, I should point out that when you export a picture from pretty much any of these programs, you aren't going to get all of this stuff. In particular, most of these programs are going to take mercy on you, and they're going to cut down all this preview image business, and you'll have just one or maybe two of them. In point of fact, when I output this particular image from On One, it had 12 or 15 or 16 kilobytes worth of one preview image, which to a photographer is basically nothing. But still, to a web page person, that's a pretty heavy burden, and you probably want to get rid of it. Other hand, if you want to preserve that GPS data, there's something different to put in your calculations. So this is the kind of stuff that we're working with. All kinds of data is in here. And sure enough, I'm pretty sure that that ISO information that I'm looking for is here. So let's go back to Photo Mechanic Plus and see what we can do about working our way back to this picture of Donut, which indeed was shot at ISO 5000. So that should give us something to play noise reduction on. So let's see what we can do. When I got Photo Mechanic Plus for the first time, it was a couple of years ago now at least, I explored and I noticed that indeed in my browse and filter sections, I could browse for and filter for some Exif data. Really, it's only 4 fields though. I can browse for the lens that was used. I can browse for the camera that was used by model. I can browse for the serial number, which isn't all that interesting. Or I can browse for this field, this user field, which is actually a Canon manufacturer-specific field. Why it's here, I don't know. I can only surmise that there's a big customer of camera bits that uses a lot of Canon cameras and wanted to be able to browse these 2 fields. But we'll just take a look. We'll pop this open, and if I want to see all the pictures in my collection that were made with a Canon 7D, there we go. I can click on it. There they are. And of course, in the filter section of Photo Mechanic Plus, I can put these things together. I can put a filter for a certain camera together with a filter for a certain lens, together with a filter for a certain keyword or a certain time delimiter, and I can add filters for searches on top of that. Indeed, I could apply a filter or make a browse and then move to search and search within that filter or that browse result. That'll work. I can do that in this particular case. I'm willing to bet there's a picture of a police car there. I'm willing to bet if I search for police, I'll get a smaller set of returns. Cool, but this doesn't get us really any closer to what I set out to do, which was to find those high ISO pictures. So I thought, I guess I can understand why I can't browse for ISO. It's just a number, And there's certainly a lot of possibilities. It's basically any number between what, 80 or 100, and nowadays 100,000 or something like that. That could be a pretty uninteresting list of stuff to browse or filter through. So let's see what we can do about searching. Let's look at our searchable fields cheat sheet. I so love these cheat sheets in Photo Mechanic Plus. There are two of them. One of them shows you the fields that you can search, and it shows you the fields that will be searched by default by Photo Mechanic if you don't tell it otherwise. Those are the ones with the little dots here. If you just type something in the search box and search for it, it'll search across all these fields that it's indicated with the little dots. If you want to search in a specific field, not all of those dot fields, you can tell Photo Mechanic to search in just this field or just those fields or whatever. Anyhow, do we have some Exif fields that we can search for? That's what we're looking for, because 4 that we could browse for was kind of a thin meal. Yeah, we do. As a matter of fact, the very first one at the top of the list is f-stop. That's an Exif field. Don't know how useful it is, but it's an Exif field. A bunch of these things are, in fact, Exif fields. GPS location is, interestingly, a composite field made out of 4 Exif fields. But here we go. ISO. That's ISO sensitivity. That's exactly what I want to do. It's right next to ISO country code, and yes, ISO in both of those cases refers to the standards organization. It means the same thing. Looking down here, okay, we have the model. That's the camera model, so that's good. One of the value propositions of that On1 product is that it works at the time of the demosaicing process in RAW conversion, and Fuji cameras particularly use a different mosaic scheme than most cameras. Instead of the Bayer scheme that most cameras use, they use a proprietary thing called X-Trans, and it's a value proposition for On1. They brag that they can, in fact, work with Fujifilm files. And I have some Fujifilm cameras, so that's good. So it looks like we have the stuff that we need to do the search that we want to do. And again, I could construct this by partly browsing and partly filtering and then searching on top of it. But why the heck bother? I can just do it all right here in this nifty little box. And by the way, we have another cheat sheet, which I'm not going to use today. But this cheat sheet is search examples. And this shows you the syntax for how you can search for all these things so that you don't have to remember it, because who wants to remember that sort of thing? So here we go. If I search for ISO that's greater than or equal to 5,000, that's pretty much high ISO images. So, okay, that's cool. I could do that. Let's say I want to narrow this down to just images made with one of my Fuji cameras. So, okay, I'll put a space here, or I can explicitly type out and, because Photo Mechanic Plus assumes a Boolean and anytime it sees a space in a search. And that's pretty cool. If you're searching for John Smith, you just type in John Smith. You don't have to type in John and Smith. You don't have to be all explicit and Boolean about it. So we'll do the model thing. And I happen to know that I have an X Pro 3 and, oh, oops. We don't want to search only in this contact sheet. We want to search in the whole library. Okay, click back into my search window, make it active, execute the search. Here we go. And I've got about 73 pictures. And gee whiz, a lot of them are pictures of Donut the cat. But let's say we want to narrow down to just pictures that include Donut the cat. Partly because I'm showing off, and partly because there's actually a point to this. So I'm going to add Donut, which could be and donut, or just a space donut. Photo Mechanic will understand, whatever. And I execute, and whoops, the search fails. So here's an important point. And I'd like to say that this is because some sort of principle and explain it in some sort of logical way. But no, this is actually just kind of a quirk of Photo Mechanic Plus. You just kind of have to remember it. If we have a couple of these Exif searches, and I want to add another search, if I want to add a Boolean and add something to it, like that, I'm looking for images where all 3 of these statements are true. ISO is greater than 5,000, model is the Fujifilm X Pro 3, and donut appears somewhere in those dotted fields, in some IPTC field or something, I'm actually going to have to set off the Exif part of the search in parentheses. Normally, you would only do that if you were using dissimilar Booleans. If you're using an or and then an and, or using a not and then an and. It's like Stephen or Stephen with two different spellings. It would be Stephen or Stephen and the guy's last name. Whatever the case, there isn't a compelling logical reason why you need to do it, but in this particular case, you run into a search that fails because you've combined some Exif fields and some IPTC fields, put the Exif fields in parentheses, and you're good to go. Another thing that's good to know here, this is a pro tip, with any of these fields, Photomechanic Plus is going to act as it normally does, which is to say it's going to search for strings and not words. If we go down here and we look at our browse and we look at the names of these cameras, some of these things are quite a mouthful. We have the Canon PowerShot XS something something or IS whatever. And it'd be pretty horrible if we had to type that in stroke for stroke, exactly that whole string. We don't have to. Part of it will do. I could just say 7D, or I could just say Hasselblad, or I could say monochrome without the E in the case of the Leica monochrome, and it would get me to where I want to go. If I'm doing lenses, lens names tend to be ridiculous alphabet soup. If you're looking for something that was shot with a 300, just type in 300. As long as that's in the name of the lens, like a zoom lens that's a 70 to 300, just type in 70 to 300, or just type in Nikkor or Summicron or whatever it is. That'll get you there. You don't actually have to be able to type in that whole horrible long name. Anyway, now that we've executed this search with donut included, we've narrowed it down from about 75 images to 52. And we can go about our business. We can do the stuff that we came here to do. If we look at one of these photos, and if we zoom in on this out of focus area at 100%, I don't know if you can see this on YouTube, but yeah, there's some noise in there that we could remove. And then here's like a really scary large cat. And let's see what happens just for the heck of it. If we run the no noise product on it, lo and behold, a very mild application of it, and the noise in the shadow areas is basically all gone, and the cat's basically all still here. And I'm so happy. And that was my first experience searching for stuff in my collection by Exif Data. And it actually worked. That's pretty cool. Now, how many fields I could search is a really good question. And I counted them up, depending on how you count. Somewhere between about 10 and about 15 Exif fields that we can search in Photomechanic Plus. Now, did I do an incompetent job of counting? What's this 10 to 15 business? Well, the reality is that some fields are composited. Some fields really are two fields, but we use them as one field, or vice versa. So it gets a little fuzzy. Bottom line, we can search for over a dozen Exif fields in Photomechanic Plus, which, when we compare with programs that kind of put this Exif searching thing in your face, is actually better than most of them. There's darn few of them that can actually search for a dozen fields. And that may seem like not very much compared to the hundreds of potential Exif fields that are out there. But come on, this is a thing that we don't need to do every day. It's pretty cool that they've given us a dozen that we can search for. Let's don't look a gift horse in the mouth. What else can we do with Exif fields? We know we can search for some. We can browse for some. We know that by default, up here in the upper right corner, we can see some Exif information. How about reading them? How about this stuff up in the right-hand corner? How do we work with this? Okay, this is Photomechanics InfoText, which is sort of a separate metadata reading function that's separate from our IPTC editor and our IPTC template editor. InfoText is completely customizable, and it appears up here in this corner of the preview window, if we go back here to a contact sheet and I do the keystroke Shift Command T on this Mac or Shift Control T on a PC, I can turn on this tooltip version of InfoText. And here's all the same InfoText information, and it pops up whenever I hover over a thumbnail, which frankly is kind of a little bit annoying. Let's turn that back off again. I can also access it at the very top of my right-click context menu as image info. And there's that information. And as I said, it's completely customizable. So how do we do that? We go to Edit, we go to Settings, and we go to Set Info Text. And here we have what, for all intents and purposes, is a text file. We can write stuff in it, and we can see that it's got a bunch of photomechanic variables in it. So the way that we work with this, in this particular case, I have a line for pixel dimensions for this image. So I typed out pixel dimensions and a colon, and I put in the variable for the width of the image and an X, the variable for the height of the image. And I think those are Exif fields, actually. And we have the information about the lens and about ISO and about those sorts of things that would probably be good to have in our info text. And we have, ta-da, we have photomechanics snapshot function. And as you can see here, I didn't make a snapshot of the default that comes with photomechanic, which does include some Exif information. So I don't exactly know what's in it. But we can see here that we can make different versions of this and use them for different occasions. That said, reality is I always use the same one because it shows me the particular things that I want to see. How deep are my Exif choices when I do this? Well, if we pop up the variables list, and by the way we put a variable into our info text or into anything else that uses variables in Photomechanic is just put the cursor where we want it, double click on it in the list, and it just pops it right in there. We could also type it if we wanted to. Anyhow, I went in here and I counted, and subject to the same limitation, where some fields that we think of as one are more than one and vice versa, there's about 36 Exif fields that Photomechanic can read for us, which is really quite a bunch of them. Let's face it, the only ones that we're all particularly interested in are the camera, the lens, the aperture, the f-stop, those kinds of things that are logged for us by the camera when we shoot the picture. So let's get out of the variables list and let's cancel out of that. And that shows us how we can read Exif information. We've deferred discussion about GPS, but what about capture time? That's certainly something that was originally logged by the camera. And indeed, that's something that we might want to work with. So if we go to Tools in Photomechanic Plus, we can do Adjust Capture Dates and Times. And this dialog exists in regular Photomechanic, exactly as it does here. Photomechanic Plus is regular Photomechanic plus all the library features, thus plus. So in this dialog, we can change the capture time of our pictures. And of course, as we know, unlike our cell phones, which kind of literally are driven by the national atomic clocks, not so much for camera clocks. Camera clocks are not as great as they could be. In the old days, they were terrible. Now they're much better, but they're very often kind of wrong. They're often kind of wrong because we don't bother to set them right. But anyhow, this dialog is where we would go typically if we shot something with multiple cameras and we wanted to synchronize the timestamps. And there's some great information on Photomechanic's website on how to do that. I think I covered it in an earlier video. But the point for today is this is Exif data. And through this, we can edit this particular bit of Exif data, which brings up an interesting question. If you've worked in information technology, you know that most IT workers are very hesitant to overwrite anything in a log file. It's not like we can't. It's not read-only in this particular case. we can edit Exif Data to our heart's delight, but do we really want to ethically? I mean, if the camera was at a 2/50th of a second when we shot the picture, it's always going to be a 2/50th of a second. I mean, that was the truth then. It'll be the truth 100 years from now. So most developers are a little bit reticent to write things into the Exif Data. That's something for us to be aware of. In this particular case, Photomechanic is going to write our new capture time in 4 fields that I can think of off the top of my head, 2 Exif ones and 2 IPTC fields. But there are more fields where that information appears. One of them is the actual file create time, and Photomechanic is offering here to adjust that for us. But there are some more Exif fields that are tied to when the image was created. We're not going to hit all of them with this adjustment. And we don't know down the line how another program is going to react to this. Is that program going to read the IPTC create date, or is it going to read one of the Exif ones? We kind of just don't know, and we kind of have to hope that we've got them in synchronization. But the reality when you're working with Exif data is it's not that standardized, and perfect synchronization between fields is probably something that won't happen. So if you manipulate anything in Exif data, be a little cautious. Look at what you've done in various programs. Make sure you're seeing the results that you want to see. I've talked before about semantically equivalent fields that exist in the IPTC data and in the Exif data. Usually we're talking about the creator field and the copyright notice field, both of which can be written by cameras, and both of which are kind of handy. The caption field in IPTC and the equivalent field in Exif are also semantically equivalent. Kind of doesn't matter that much because there's no camera that I know of that can actually write anything into the caption field. And again, it's up to each individual developer how they're going to deal with that. Are they going to synchronize those fields? Which field overwrites which field? When does it happen? It's situational. And I just can't give you any sanguine advice to go out into the world and know that it works a particular way. Best practice is, if you're working across multiple programs, just make sure that the things are behaving the way that you want them to behave. And, as always, information that's critical, whether it originally existed as Exif information, whether it originally existed in that reporter's notebook in your pocket, or whatever, needs to be entrusted to the appropriate IPTC field and needs to be clear. For the most part, that means that really critical information needs to be in the caption. And that's why when we write captions, many organizations require us to put a time element in the caption because we don't want to have to worry about what field it's in, whether the fields all agree, whether the clock was correct, or whatever. If we write into the caption the date when we shot the picture, that's going to carry the day for us down the road. And I guess that's the capstone for discussing Exif data and how we can use it, which is use it, but verify. Skip the trust step, use it, verify it, make sure it's doing what you want it to do, and make sure that your picture's health and happiness as it goes through life doesn't depend on something that's in the Exif data. So there you have it. There's stuff that you can do with Exif data in Photomechanic Plus. Stay tuned. I'll eventually do a video on cool stuff that you can do with GPS, which is really Exif data, kind of, in Photomechanic Plus. In the meantime, do you have an Exif data adventure story? Do you have questions about the searching business and the syntax? I know I should do a video specifically on that, and I haven't. I'll get to it eventually. Or is there anything else on your mind? Reach out in the comments down below, or on the blog, on the contact page perhaps, or on social media. And until next time, as always, be careful out there. It's a harsh world right now. And mind your metadata.